the Believe podcast, a conversation between friends over a passage of Scripture. I'm Carolyn Kirsten.
And I'm Marvin Williams.
And today is episode 110. Today we are learning that Jesus teaches about Sabbath by his actions as well as direct teaching. We're going to see it play out in both ways.
We talked a little bit about this in the past, episode 96. If you want to go back
in our Spiritual Rhythms series,
listen to that, you can. Question.
Okay.
How do you prefer to spend or use your weekends?
Oh, how do I prefer to spend these? I was going to say, this weekend we have some yard work that we have to do, but yard work is not my preferred way to spend my weekend. But I do like, during the fall, watching football. I love reading. I do tend to, quieter, hanging out with the family. Going to Qdoba after church is a regular rhythm we have.
Okay.
Little product placement there. How about you?
Same thing. Again, in the fall, college football.
Yeah.
Either I'm watching it or attending games. I love it. I kind of go back and forth between games at times, and fall, I prefer that. Same thing with in the fall, basketball season, later fall.
Yeah.
Love watching sports or love watching basketball or going to a basketball game. Just if there are things around the house to be done, I don't prefer to do that, but
it's a good time to do it.
It's a good time to do it.
Yes.
Those are some things that I do on the weekend, but I prefer to just kind of veg a little bit, watch games, that's my weekend. So I prefer something restful, and to me that is restful. So why are we talking about this? We hit upon Sabbath, as I mentioned in episode 96. But we bump up against it again in these stories, and one story kind of catapults us into, particularly from John, a conversation about Sabbath. Mm-hmm. And so in John chapter 5, this man we come across a man who's been lame for 38 years, and Jesus sees him. One of the things I love about this particular story is that Jesus is the initiator. He initiates contact with this man who's been lame for 38 years. And so Jesus sees him, comes over to him, and Jesus asks a very, very curious question. What do you want me to do for you in essence? And the man responds, how?
He says, he explained. When Jesus says, do you want to be healed? He says, sir, I can't do this myself. He's at this pool of Siloam, which was known to have healing properties, that when there were certain times which you had to get in there first. Yeah. And of course, being a lame man, he was not able to do that himself. So he says, I want to get well, but I can't do this for myself. I think, and the fact that Jesus asks him, do you want to get well, does feel a little bit like a duh sort of question.
Right.
But I think there is value in understanding actually what our desires are and acknowledging those. I think a lot of us go through life kind of numb to what our truest heart's desires are. And Jesus cares about those. He actually wants him to articulate. Yeah. Do you want to get well? Yes, I really do.
Yeah. And Jesus recognizes that, and he tells him, take up your mat and walk. And we see from the story, the man receives strength in his legs, and he's now walking. He ultimately, he doesn't know who actually healed him, but the fact that he's healed and now he's walking, he's carrying his mat on the Sabbath. Actually, John lets us know that, and it was the Sabbath.
Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah. And that's a big deal, because the religious leaders find him carrying his mat, walking, and they celebrate him, right?
Unfortunately, no. They miss out on that completely. They just get all worked up about the fact that he's carrying his mat on the Sabbath, which, if let's hope we are not like that as followers of Jesus, that we get so worked up about petty little things. And unfortunately, I know this does happen. We get worked up about petty little things that don't go with the preferences that we prefer. And that's what's happening there. That was the Sabbath, this weekly rhythm of rest, which we talked about in detail in that episode. That's what it was about. But then all kinds of nitpicky little details had been added to the law. And that's what they get so worked up about. And they miss the whole exciting point of this moment, that this man has been healed.
38 years. He's not been able to walk. And you would think that religious leaders would say, "Oh, God is at work."
Yes, right.
And instead of celebrating, they criticize, and then they badger him. They ask him questions. Who told you can do this? And the man has limited knowledge about who actually healed him, which I kind of love. When I say limited knowledge, the man is very innocent in this sense, and so I don't know, and I don't know who did it, and so which releases another initiation. Jesus initiates again, finds him in the I think he's in the temple, the synagogue, and Jesus has a conversation. He rounds out his knowledge of who Jesus is, and then he tells this man, says, "Hey, listen, in essence, go and sin no more, lest a worse thing come upon you." So there's maybe a little bit of a connection with the man's lifestyle and how he ended up this way. That's not in every case, but we get a sense that Jesus recognizes that there's something there. And so what happens then?
Yeah. And then Jesus addresses the Pharisees' angst about what is happening. And he reminds them, my Father is working. He's always working, and I am working. And this is one of those references we mentioned at the last episode about new wine in new wineskins. This Sabbath tradition, which again has been established even from the very beginning of Genesis. Jesus isn't saying throw Sabbath out the window, but he's saying, hey, let's look at this in a new way. And meeting human needs takes priority over rituals and dry practices.
Absolutely.
Every day of the week. My Father, God, is always working, and I am working too, to meet the needs of people.
Which lets me know instead of being upset with Jesus, they probably should have been upset with God, because Jesus is saying God is the one who's doing this. He is the one who's working. So if you want to get upset with someone, don't get upset with me. I'm only doing what I see the Father doing. I'm only doing what the Father does. And so if you want to be all in a tizzy about something, you should be arguing with God, because Jesus simply reminds them of the purpose of the Sabbath. The purpose of the Sabbath is to meet human need. The purpose of the Sabbath is to show acts of compassion and mercy. That takes precedence over keeping a rule. And so I think Jesus reminds them of the purpose of the Sabbath.
And this is not the only time they get upset with Jesus about this, what he does on the Sabbath. Matthew and Mark and Luke record a time when Jesus and his disciples are going through the grain fields, and his disciples are pulling some heads of grain as they are going through and eating them. Harvesting is what the Pharisees call that. And they get up in arms again, like, why are your disciples doing this? You're not supposed to be harvesting on the Sabbath. And how does Jesus handle this disgruntledness?
And again, he is reminding them that he uses a story from the Old Testament, and how when David and his men were hungry, they were able to get food from from the holy place in a sense. And so here again is human need takes precedent over these petty rules, as you say. And so if there's a need, then I should meet that need, as opposed to saying, well, this is my day off, can't meet that need, or it's a day of rest, can't meet that need. Again, the Sabbath was made for us to actually bless God in not only resting our bodies, but also helping other people to experience rest, whether it's dealing with hunger issues, dealing with medical issues. When we serve people in that way, we're helping them to experience a level of rest and shalom. That is bringing back together those pieces that are broken. So when a person is hungry and we feed them, that's bringing shalom. When a person is sick and we help to mend that ailment, we're bringing a level of shalom. And we can do that on any day.
Right.
It doesn't have to be a special day. So again, I think Jesus is highlighting once again that it's not about ritual. It's not about a dull rule. It really is about how do we show compassion and love and mercy to people who are in need.
And I love how Jesus states it in Mark 2:27, that the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. The Sabbath's purpose is to help us to work from a place of rest, to celebrate and enjoy the good gifts that God has given us. And if instead it's become this list of don'ts, even last night in my Bible study, we were talking about Sundays, and one of the gals said that her dad, growing up, lived in a very strict household, and he hated Sundays, like the very thing that I'm sure his parents did not want. But because they could hardly talk, they couldn't play with their toys. I mean, it was just this very somber, serious, you can't do anything. Exactly the opposite of what the purpose of the Sabbath is for.
And I think again, it is that new wine and new wineskins. And Jesus releases us. He frees us from duty and rule, and to say even on a Sabbath, it is really about the heart and not about the outward appearance. It's not about performance. It really is about God gripping our hearts. So what?
And then there's one more. Okay. Then he just keeps going, doing all these things, because he also heals a man with a withered hand. And speaking to Jesus' focus on the heart, it is in Mark 3:5, where they're getting up in arms that he's healed on the Sabbath. And it says, and he looked around at them with anger, grieved at their hardness of heart. Oh, this is actually before. And said to the man, stretch out your hand. Because they kind of challenged him, like, hey, is he gonna heal this guy? Oh, sure enough. But that Jesus is grieved at their hardness of heart, or another version, the NIV says, deeply distressed at their stubborn hearts. Like, this is a big deal. When we've reduced the Sabbath to rituals and rules, we have so missed it, and that is deeply disturbing. Deeply disturbing.
And I think Jesus' question sums up this entire thing. Would you rather I do good or harm? And that's a pretty simple, compelling question. No, and they were silent, because of course you should do good. And that, I think that closes the loop on this to say, if we're able to do good on the Sabbath as opposed to harm, then we should choose to do good all the time, whether it's our rest day or not. That part of the shalom of God that we're bringing is to be able to do good, being able to take broken pieces and bring them back together again. And if that's feeding the hungry, going to visit individuals in the hospital or in prison, that's a part of that. And again, we can do that on Sunday. We can do that on Saturday. We can literally do good anytime. And I think that's what God invites us to do.
Absolutely. So what can we believe about God, ourselves, and others from this section?
I think, man, for what we can believe about God is that God truly wants us to enjoy the Sabbath, and he wants us to bless others on the Sabbath. It's not about ritual. It's not about rule. But it truly is about this sense of how do I enjoy God and how do I enjoy others on a day that God has given to us as a gift. And so anyway, I think that's one of the things that I can know and believe about God.
I totally agree with that too. Like what a beautiful gift it is that God has given to us, and this is a day not for rules and rigidity. I mean, I for sure can be prone to legalism and
absolutely,
falling into like, oh, it's got to be a certain way. But just remembering, hey, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath, I think is a great reminder of just holding that loosely, looking for those opportunities if there are needs that can be met, and enjoying that opportunity for rest that God has built in for us.
Yeah. And I think for me is every chance I have to do good and not harm, it really becomes a boundary. So if what I'm about to say is going to hurt or harm someone, then I am adding to the brokenness as opposed to bringing shalom.
Yeah.
So asking those two questions, am I doing good or am I doing harm, I think helps me to shape how I Sabbath. And ultimately God invites us to do good, to his glory, of course, not to do good just to do good, but to do good to help bring shalom to a broken world.
Yeah. Thank you, friends, for joining us. If you like what you hear, subscribe. Then you can get the episode every Tuesday morning right on your phone in your podcast player. And also share these episodes with your friend. You could have your own spiritual conversation with a friend this week.